Hi, I'm Jodh, and today I'm going to be reading you Some of the Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. Chapter 1. Miss Cackle's Academy for Witches stood at the top of a mountain surrounded by a pine forest. It looked more like a prison than a school, with its gloomy grey walls and turrets. Sometimes you could see the pupils on their broomsticks, flitting like bats above the playground wall. But usually the place was half hidden in mist, so that if you glanced up at the mountain you would probably not have noticed the buildings was there at all. Everything about the school was dark and shadowy. There were long narrow corridors and winding staircases, and of course there were the girls themselves, dressed in black gym slips, black stockings, black hobnailed boots, grey shirts and black and grey ties. Even their summer dresses were black and grey checked. The only touches of colour were the sashes around their gym slips, a different colour for each house, and the school badge, which was a black cat sitting on a yellow moon. For special occasions, such as prize giving or Halloween, there was another uniform consisting of a long robe worn with a tall pointed hat, but as these were black too, it didn't really make much of a change. There were so many rules you couldn't do anything without being told off, and there seemed to be tests and exams every week. Mildred Hubble was in her first year at the school. She was one of those who always seemed to be in trouble. She didn't exactly mean to break the rules and annoy the teachers, but things just seemed to happen whenever she was around. You could rely on Mildred to have her hat on back to front, or her bootlaces trailing along the floor. She couldn't walk from one end of the corridor to the other without someone yelling at her, and nearly every night she was writing lines or being kept in, not that there was anywhere to go if you were allowed out. Anyway, she had lots of friends, even if they did keep their distance in Potion Laboratory. And her best friend Maud stayed loyally by her through everything, however hair-raising. They were a funny pair, for Mildred was tall and thin with long plaits which she often chewed absent-mindedly, another thing she was told off about, while Maud was short and tubby, had round glasses and wore her hair in bunches. On the first day at the academy, each pupil was given a broomstick and taught how to ride it, which takes a lot of time and isn't nearly as easy as it looks. Halfway through the first term, they were each presented with Black Kitten, which they trained to ride the broomsticks. The cats weren't for any practical purpose except to keep tradition going. Some schools presented owls instead, but it's a matter of taste. Miss Cackle was a very traditional headmistress who did not believe in any newfangled nonsense, and trained her young witches to keep up all the customs that had been taught in her young day. At the end of the first year, each pupil received a copy of the popular Book of Spells, a 3-inch thick volume bound by black leather. This was not really to be used, as they already had paperback editions for the classroom, but like the cats, it was another piece of tradition. Apart from yearly prize giving, there were no more presentations until the 5th and final year, when most pupils were awarded the Witch's High certificate. It would not seem likely that Mildred would ever get that far. After only 2 days in the school, she crashed her broomstick into the yard wall, breaking the broomstick in half and bending her hat. She mended the stick with glue and sticky tape. Unfortunately, it still flew, but there was an ugly bundle where the ends joined, and sometimes it was rather difficult to control. The story really begins halfway through Mildred's first term, on the night before the kitten's presentation. It was almost midnight, and the school was in darkness except for one narrow window, lit softly by the glow of a candle. This was Mildred's room, where she was sitting in bed wearing a pair of black and grey striped pyjamas, and dropping off to sleep every few minutes. Maud was curled up at the end of the bed, enveloped in a grey flannel nightdress and a black woolen shawl. Each pupil had the same type of room, a very simple, with a wardrobe, iron bedstead, table and chair, and slit windows, like the ones used by archers in castles of long ago. There was a picture rail along the bare walls, from which hung a sampler embroidered with a quotation from the Book of Spells, and also, during the day, several bats. Mildred had 3 rats in her room, little furry ones, which were very friendly. She was fond of animals and looked forward to the next day when she would have a kitten of her own. Everyone was excited about the presentation, and they had all spent the evening ironing their uniforms and polishing their boots. Maud was too excited to sleep, so it sneaked into Mildred's room to talk about it with her friend. "What are you going to call yours, Maud?" asked Mildred sleepily. "Midnight," said Maud. "I think it sounds dramatic." "I'm worried about the whole thing," Mildred confessed, chewing the end of her plait. "I'm sure I'll do something dreadful, like treading on its tail, or else it will take one look at me and leap out of the window. Something's bound to go wrong." "Don't be silly," said Maud. "You know you have a way with animals. And as for treading on its tail, it won't even be on the floor. Miss Cackle hands it to you, and that's all there is to it. So there's nothing to worry about, is there?" Before Mildred had time to reply, the door crashed open, revealing their former mistress, Miss Hardman, standing in the doorway, wrapped in a black dressing gown with a lantern in her hand. She was a tall, terrifying lady with sharp, bony face and black hair stragged back into such a tight knot her forehead looked quite stretched. "Rather late to be up, isn't it, girls?" she inquired nastily. The girls, who'd leapt into each other's arms when the door burst open, drew apart and fixed their eyes on the floor. "Of course, if we didn't want to be included in the presentation tomorrow, we are certainly going about it the right way," said Miss Hardman, continued icily. "Yes, Miss Hardman," chorused the girls. Miss Hardman glared meaningfully at Mildred's candle and swept into the corridor with Maud in front of her. Mildred hastily blew out the candle and dived under her bedclothes, but she could not get to sleep. Outside the window she could hear the owls hooting, and somewhere in the school a door had been left open and was creaking backwards and forwards in the wind. To tell you the truth, Mildred was afraid of the dark, but don't let anyone know. I mean, who ever had heard of a witch who was scared of the dark? Chapter 2. The presentation took place in a grand hall, a huge stone room with rows of wooden benches, a raised platform at one end, and shields and portraits all around the walls. The whole school had assembled, and Miss Cackle and Miss Hardroom stood behind the table on the platform. On the table was a large wicker basket, from which came mews and squeaks. First of all, everyone sang the school song, which went like this: "Onward, ever striving onward, proudly on our brooms we fly, straight and true above the treetops, shadowed in the moonlight sky. Never will a day pass before us when we have not tried our best to keep our cauldrons bubbling nicely, cast our spells and charms with zest. Full of joy we mix our potions, working by each other's side. When our days at school are over, let us think of them with pride." It was the usual type of school song, full of pride, joy, and striving. Mildred had never yet mixed a potion with joy, nor flown her broomstick with pride. She was usually too busy trying to keep it upright. Anyway, when they finished the droning last verse, Miss Cackle rang the silver bell on her table, and the girls marched up in single file to receive their kittens. Mildred was last of all, and the kitten, when she reached the table, Miss Cackle pulled out of the basket, not a sleek black kitten like all the others, but a little tabby, with white paws, and the sort of fur that looked as if it had been pulled out in a gale. "We ran out of black ones," explained Miss Cackle, with a pleasant grin. Miss Hardroom smiled too, but nastily. After the ceremony, everyone wished to see Mildred's kitten. "I think H.B. had a hand in this somewhere," said Maud darkly. H.B. was their nickname for Miss Hardroom. "I must admit, it does look a bit dim, doesn't it?" said Mildred, scratching the tabby's kitten's head. "But I don't really mind. I'll just have to think of another name. I was going to call it Sooty. Let's take them down to the playground and see what they make of broomstick riding." Almost all the first years were in the yard, trying to persuade their puzzled kittens to sit on their broomsticks. Several were already clinging on by their claws, and one kitten, belonging to a rather smug young witch named Ethel, was sitting bolt upright, cleaning its paws, as if it had been on a broomstick its whole life. Riding a broomstick was no easy matter, as I have mentioned before. First, you ordered the stick to hover, and it hovered lengthways above the ground. Then you sat on it and gave it a sharp tap, and away you flew. Once in the air, you could make the stick do almost anything by saying right, left, stop, down a bit, and so on. The difficult part was balancing, for if you leaned a little too far to one side, you could easily overbalance, in which case you either fall off or find yourself hanging upside down, and then you would just have to hold on with your skirt over your head until a friend came to your rescue. It had taken Mildred several weeks of falling off and crashing before she could ride a broomstick reasonably well, and it looked as though her kitten was going to have the same trouble she was. When she put it on the end of the stick, it just fell off without even trying to hold on. After many attempts, Mildred picked up her kitten and gave it a shake. "Listen," she said severely, "I think I shall have to call you stupid. You can't even try to hold on. Everyone else is all right. Look at all your friends." The kitten gazed at her sadly and licked its nose with its rough tongue. "Oh, come on," said Mildred, softening her voice. "I'm not really angry with you. Let's just try again." And she put the kitten on the broomstick, from which it fell off with a thud. Maud was having better luck with her kitten, hanging on grimly upside down. "Oh, well," laughed Maud, "it's a start." "Mine's useless," said Mildred, sitting on the broomstick for a rest. "Never mind," Maud said. "Think how hard it must be for them to hang on by their claws." A flash of an idea came into Mildred's head, and she dived into the school, leaving her kitten chasing a leaf along the ground, and the broomstick patiently hovering. She came out carrying her satchel, which she hooked over the end of the broom, and then bundled the kitten into it. The kitten's astounded face peeped out of the bag as Mildred flew delighted around the yard. "Look, Maud," she called from 10 feet up in the air. "That's cheating," said Maud, looking at the satchel. Mildred flew back and landed on the ground, laughing. "I don't think Miss H.B. will approve," said Maud doubtfully. "Quite right, Maud," an icy voice behind them said. "Mildred, my dear, possibly could it be even easier with handlebars and a saddle?" Mildred blushed. "I'm sorry, Miss Hardbroom," she muttered. "It doesn't balance very well, my kitten, so I thought perhaps—" Her voice trailed away under Miss Hardbroom's stony glare, and Mildred unhooked her satchel and turned the bewildered kitten to the ground. "Girls," Miss Hardbroom clapped her hands, "I would remind you that there is a potion test tomorrow morning. That is all." So saying, she disappeared, literally. "I wish you wouldn't do that," whispered Maud, looking at the place where the form mistress had been standing. "You're never quite sure whether she's gone or not." "Right again, Maud," came Miss Hardbroom's voice from nowhere. Maud gulped and hurried back to her kitten. Chapter 3.